But the commander has failed in his duty if he has not won victory, for that is his duty. He has no other comparable to it. He will see himself for what he is, a defeated general. In a dark hour, he will turn in upon himself and question the very foundations of his leadership and his manhood. And then he must stop. For if he is ever to command in battle again, he must shake off these regrets and stamp on them as they claw at his will and his self-confidence. He must beat off these attacks he delivers against himself and cast out the doubts born of failure. Forget them and remember only the lessons to be learned from defeat. They are more than from victory. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. The men of Burma Corps, when they reached Imphal, were physically and mentally very near the end of their strength. They had endured casualties, hardships, hunger, sickness, and above all, the heart-breaking frustration of retreat to a degree that few armies have suffered and yet held together as armies. They did not expect to be treated as heroes, but they did expect to be met as soldiers who, even if defeated, were by no means disgraced. That was an excerpt from the book Defeat into Victory, Battling Japan in Burma and India from 1942 through 1945. The book was written by Field Marshal Viscount William Slim, who was the commander of Burma Corps from March through May 1942. Burma Corps was made up of British, Indian, and local Burmese troops. And in this episode of Construction Genius, we will look at the failed Burma Campaign of 1942 through the eyes of the commander on the ground, who was then not a field marshal, he was a lieutenant general, and his name again is William Slim. He was known to his troops as Bill Slim, and he was the commander of the British and Indian and Burmese troops in their battle against the invading Japanese army. Bill Slim was a fighting commander, very much a boots on the ground kind of guy. And in this book that we are going to draw from in this episode, it is taken from a time when he was on the front lines pretty consistently. Now, he wasn't necessarily in the trenches with a rifle in his hand, but he was under fire. He was moving with his troops. In other words, he was similar in many ways to, let's say, a project manager or a superintendent in terms of a construction project who is dealing with the issues on site on a daily basis. So they may not be swinging a hammer or, setting out a crew of guys to do some work. And as we look at this book and as we look at the Burma Campaign, there's three things that caused the defeat of the British. And those three things are, number one, a lack of preparation. Number two, unclear overall objective and strategy. And number three, poor execution. So as we go through the podcast today, I'm going to draw parallels between this military campaign and a construction project. And at the end of the podcast, I'm going to give you a series of next steps that you can take to evaluate your projects and learn from your failures. After this defeat in 1942, the commander, Bill Slim, took a lot of time thinking about it. And through that thinking process, he was able to identify areas where he had failed and where the British had failed. And as a result of that, was able to make changes that led to the defeat of the Japanese in the years 1944 and 1945. Before we dive into those reasons for the defeat, I'd like to talk the duty of a military commander so that you can think about your duty as a construction leader. So I'm going to read a little bit more from the book. Defeat is bitter. Bitter to the common soldier, but trebly bitter to his general. The soldier may comfort himself with the thought that whatever the result, he has done his duty, faithfully and steadfastly. But the commander has failed in his duty if he has not won victory, for that is his duty. The only test of generalship is success, and I had succeeded in nothing I attempted. It's very interesting here. Bill Slim taking complete responsibility for the defeat of the troops that he was leading. So what does it mean to succeed as a construction leader? Well, there's three main aspects of any construction project. You must bid the work, you must plan the work, and then you must build the work. Some of you, I'm sure, are responsible for all of those aspects in terms of your leadership. Some perhaps for only one or two of those three main aspects. You've got to win it, you've got to plan it, and you've got to build it. And when you build the work, you must do it safely, on time, and under budget. This is what it means to win for a construction leader. Now think about the failures that you've experienced in your life as a construction leader. Think about the projects that still kind of stick in your craw, and you think about them and you kick yourself and you are upset about them. How much have you learned from those defeats, from those failed projects? Do you find yourself making the same mistakes over and over again? Or can you say that despite my failures, I'm learning from those and I'm getting better incrementally as I go through my career as a construction leader? That is one thing that Bill Slim did very well. So let's go back to the book here for a moment. On the 20th of May, 1942, I handed over all my troops to 4 Corps, and Burma Corps ceased to exist. There was then nothing more for me to do in Imphal. I said goodbye to Scott and Cohen, those were a couple of his subordinates, and to as many units as I could reach. I had a horrible feeling I was deserting them, and the friendship and loyalty that the officers and men showed me when I bade them farewell only made it worse. To be cheered by troops whom you have led to victory is grand and exhilarating. To be cheered by the gaunt remnants of those whom you have led only in defeat, withdrawal, and disaster is infinitely moving and humbling. I now had an opportunity for a few days to sit down and think out what had happened during the last crowded months and why it had happened. That's exactly what you need to do after each project, and particularly the ones that fail. You need to sit down and ask yourself and your team what happened and why did it happen. Let's go back to the book here. The outstanding and incontrovertible fact was that we had taken a thorough beating. We, the Allies, had been outmaneuvered, outfought, and out-generaled. It was easy, of course, to find excuses for our failure, but excuses are no use for next time. What is wanted are causes and remedies. So that now leads us to the heart of the episode, the causes of the defeat that the Burma Corps experienced in 1942 at the hands of the Japanese. And in thinking about these causes, we can consider how we can think about the projects that we build and how we can get better and learn from our failures. So we're going to go back to the book here again. In preparation, in execution, in strategy, and in tactics, we had been worsened, and we had paid the penalty, defeat. So let's pull out three things there. Number one, a lack of preparation. Number two, unclear overall objectives and strategy. And number three, poor execution. These were the causes of defeat for the Burma Corps. And I would bet that in many projects where you have failed, those three things may come up. Maybe one of them, maybe two of them, maybe all of them. But again, I'll repeat them. A lack of preparation, unclear overall objectives and strategy, and poor execution. Let's look first at a lack of preparation. We'll go back to the book. The first and overriding one was lack of preparation. Until a few weeks before it happened, no higher authority, civil or military, had expected an invasion of Burma. The British forces were controlling Burma at a particular time. If you remember, the British Empire was huge with places like India and Burma under their control. But the Japanese invaded Burma, and it was a complete surprise to the folks on the ground. So we'll go back to the book here. They were all grievously pressed in other quarters, and what was held to be the comparatively minor responsibility of the defense of Burma was tossed from one to another so that no one held it long enough to plan and provide over an adequate period. Now, this is very interesting. You see, the Allies made a commitment to a particular strategy early in the war, and it was called the Germany First strategy. They wanted to defeat Germany before they went on to defeat Japan. The problem was, while they were focused so much on defeating Germany in Europe, they neglected the need to fight Japan in an effective way in Asia and in the Pacific. And as a result of that, they suffered many defeats. Not only did they fail to concentrate on Japan because they had to choose to fight Germany first, but the actual command of the area of Burma bounced from one person to another. And as a result of that, no one person committed to the necessary planning and preparation for the invasion by Japan. So they were not only taken by surprise, but they were completely unprepared and unready. So think back to a project that you have taken on in the past that was not top priority, that for whatever reason you didn't assign your best people to, or it was given to one project manager and then to another project manager. There was general neglect of the project, and that led to issues and profit fade. Let's go back to the book and get a little more insight into this lack of preparation. The two great errors that grew from this, that is from this lack of preparation, were the military separation of Burma from India and the division of operational from administrative control. Isn't that interesting? And this is something I got again and again as I read through this book, was that they had all these silos between administration and operations. In other words, between the people who were fighting on the ground and the people who were getting all the supplies and the logistics. They divided between geographies unnecessarily, and therefore they were not coordinated in the way that they were approaching the battle against Japan. So there were silos, there was a lack of coordination, there was a lack of preparation and communication. So we'll go back to the book here. An army whose plan of campaign is founded on fundamental errors in organization cannot hope for success unless it has vast superiority over the enemy in numbers and in material. Now think about what that means for your construction company. If you make fundamental errors in your preparation, in your pre-planning for building a project, the only way you can overcome those errors in many cases is by throwing people and cash at the project. And that is not a way to run a profitable construction company. And that's why prior preparation is so critical. And so again, There was a separation of geographies. There was a division of operations from administration. And you know that those things happen in construction. We'll go back to the book here. Another fatal admission springing from the same cause was that until too late, no serious attempt was made to connect India and Burma by road, so that when Rangoon fell, which is in Burma, the army in Burma was for all practical purposes isolated. So there was poor communication between India and Burma, and so therefore there couldn't be a supply of troops and equipment from India to Burma, and there was that isolation, and that led to defeat as well. So again, poor preparation led to defeat. A little bit more from the book here. A most obvious instance of the lack of preparation was the smallness and unsuitability of the forces provided to defend Burma. Two ill-found, hurriedly collected, and inexperienced divisions, of which one had been trained and equipped for desert warfare, and if you know anything about Burma, it's a bunch of jungles, and the other contained a large proportion of raw and unreliable Burmese troops. And that was tragically insufficient to meet superior Japanese forces in a country the size and topography of Burma. So not only were they poorly prepared, not only were there divisions, not only was there a lack of communication, but the troops on the ground were either inexperienced in jungle warfare or completely green. And there wasn't really enough of them to do the fighting. And as a result of that, lack of preparation, failure occurred. Now, here's another interesting note in light of preparation that you may think about with regards to any current projects you're working on. We'll go back to the book again. Up to December 1941, even the military regarded the likelihood of invasion as remote. So it was not surprising that the civil government did not take comprehensive measures to educate and prepare the population for it. When it became evident that war was imminent, the civil authorities were reluctant to organize evacuation schemes, refugee control, intelligence machinery, the militarization of railways, or anything in the nature of a home guard. There was a fear, which seems often to afflict other administrations than the Burman, that if the people were told unpleasant things about an unpleasant situation, they might become depressed and panic. As a result, no one was prepared for war, and the series of British reverses was a stunning surprise. Now think about the current projects that you're working on, the current situations that you're involved in your business. People cannot prepare if they are not told unpleasant things about unpleasant situations. You cannot withhold information that is necessary to help address the issues and the challenges that your company is facing. And that's one of the errors that the British made and the administration of Burma made, was not sharing that information with their people because they didn't want to panic them. If you have good people, you're not going to panic them by telling them unpleasant things about unpleasant situations. Make sure that you're open about the challenges that the company is facing so that you can rally the troops and prepare to face those challenges. Preparation was hindered by a lack of willingness to face reality. If you've signed the contracts, your ass is on the line, right? The project's coming. There's no use burying your head in the sand. Now is the time to prepare and do whatever you need to make sure that you can build that project on schedule, safely, and with good quality. It's interesting. I was chatting with a construction executive some time ago. They had spent a year working on a large project that they wanted to win. And in about a few days, they were going to meet with the owner of the project and do a presentation to them. And I asked them if they knew who the final money decision maker was, the person with the gold who was going to decide who got the project. And the executive kind of mumbled a bit and told me that he thought that one individual was the money guy. And in reality, he did not know who the money person was. He had a year to prepare for this, but he had missed the mark on it. And so think about this for you. Whether you're bidding the work, whether you're planning the work, whether you're building the work, where are you falling short in terms of your preparation? If you have good preparation and the right people in place to build the project, then you're going to be far more likely to succeed. But you can do all the preparation that you like. If you have a lousy plan, that's not going to help. And that leads us to the second cause of defeat. And that was an unclear overall objective and strategy. And this one is very, very important. So let's go back to the book here. To me, thinking it all over, the most distressing aspect of the whole disastrous campaign had been the contrast between our generalship and the enemy's. The Japanese leadership was confident, bold to the point of foolhardiness, and so aggressive that never for one day did they lose the initiative. Their object, clear and definite, was the destruction of our forces. Ours, a rather nebulous idea of retaining territory. Let me just repeat that last bit. Their object, in other words, their objective, was clear and definite. It was the destruction of our forces. He goes on here. We needed, from the highest authority, a clear directive of what was to be our purpose in Burma. It was painfully obvious that the lack of a definite, realistic directive from above made it impossible for our immediate commanders to define our object with the clarity essential. Whoever was responsible, there was no doubt that we had been weakened basically by this lack of a clear object. So let me give you some takeaways here. Think about the highest authority in your organization. And I realize some of you listening to this show here today work for very large companies. But if you're going to successfully execute a project, particularly if it's a large, complex project where there's a lot on the line, the highest authorities in your organization need to set forth a clear directive of your objective and strategy with that project. And that must flow down from the very highest levels of your organization to the executives, to the PMs, to the supers, to the foremen, and then to their crews. Everybody needs to understand what defines success in terms of quality, safety, customer service. Each person needs to have a clear picture of how their efforts fit into the success of the project. And they even need to understand how the project helps the company achieve its overall objectives. A clear purpose for the building of this project, a clear why, then impacts the tactics of the how, the who, and the what. And it also impacts morale. Imagine what it's like for the folks who are doing the hardline fighting if they can show up every day on the job site, knowing why we're building this project, how we're going to get it done, who's going to do it, what the impact is on the organization. So don't rely on your PM or your superintendent to know this. From the highest level of your organization, you have to be able to communicate it down and make sure that those folks are then communicating it out to the troops. Keep that higher purpose and objective in mind and keep repeating it to them throughout the project. And that is the job of your senior level folks, your C-level folks, your project executives, to understand and clearly communicate a higher objective for the project. So we've talked about a lack of preparation. We've talked about an unclear overall objective and strategy. Finally, let's look at poor execution. We'll go back to the book here. To our men, British or Indian, the jungle was a strange, fearsome place. Moving and fighting in it was a nightmare. We were too ready to classify the jungle as impenetrable, as indeed it was to us with our motor transport, bulky supplies, and inexperience. To us, it appeared only as an obstacle to movement and to vision. To the Japanese, it was a welcome means of concealed maneuver and surprise. The Japanese used formations specially trained and equipped for a country of jungle and rivers, while we used troops whose training and equipment, as far as they had been completed, were for the open desert. You see, most of the British troops came from fighting in the deserts of North Africa, and they were completely unfamiliar with the jungles. So back to the book. The Japanese reaped the deserved reward for their foresight and thorough preparation. We paid the penalty for our lack of both. So let's take a look at some of the issues here. Number one, they had inexperienced troops. Now, it didn't mean that these guys didn't know how to fight, but they didn't know how to fight in the jungle. Many of them were expert in desert warfare, but they were not expert in jungle warfare, and they were uncomfortable. So think about the projects that you're building at the moment. You may have some good people on those projects, but do they really know how to build those projects effectively? Think about the projects that you have experienced failure in the past. Perhaps you had good guys and gals on that project, but they just weren't skilled enough to execute it profitably. Not only was there inexperience with that particular type of warfare, but there was also a lack of supplies and equipment. They didn't have the right equipment. They weren't equipped to move in the jungle. And as a result of a lack of equipment and a lack of supplies, they failed. So too on a construction project. If you don't have the right equipment, if you don't have good logistics, and it can affect your profitability and it can cause failure. And then the last part, which is really interesting, is that they had poor intelligence. The British had poor intelligence, and it's very interesting this. The most infuriating thing was that while we guessed about the Japanese movements and tactics in terms of how they were approaching the British, while they guessed at that, they never got warning of them because they didn't have a good spy network. See, spies in war are essential because they bring you information about what's going on. And that is very true in construction as well. Now, you don't need spies in construction, but what do you need? You need a steady flow of information from the job site about what's happening. Think back to my earlier illustration about the guy who's bidding a project. He was bidding this project and he was not sure exactly who the final money person was. He needed that intelligence and that information. And so the success of your projects many times are driven by the quality of the information that you get, both in terms of winning work, planning work, and then building the work. So think about the quality of the information you get from the field in terms of daily reports on production, in terms of issues with other subs or owners or contractors, in terms of logistical issues. Are you getting that flow of information? And then are you using that information to make decisions about what you need to do to be profitable? So I was chatting with one of my clients just this week, and they're doing a project that they haven't really done a lot of. And this particular project manager who's on the project hasn't done a lot of this type of work. It's a ground up building. And so the senior executive is committed to going out to that job site once a week as the job kicks off so that he can get the information that he needs through observation and through talking to the guys on the ground to make sure that the project gets kicked off well and doesn't get into a failure mode. So whatever you need to do, make sure that you're getting the intelligence from your projects, the information from your projects, so that you can make decisions to avoid failure. And again, we're talking about learning from your failures, and you might be thinking, Eric, last few years have been pretty good. I know I haven't been as perhaps profitable as I could be, but the volume has been sufficient to make up from the lack of profitability. And I've got inexperienced guys in the field, and as a result of that, we're not really as productive or high quality as we could be. Why do I need to worry about learning from my failures when things are going pretty good at the moment? Well, I'll just say this. Things aren't always going to go as well as they're going at the moment. At some point, there's going to be at least a little bit of a downturn. And if you can learn from your mistakes today and from your failures today, it's going to very much help you in the future. And so if you're not hitting your numbers in terms of profitability or safety or production, if there is some aspect of failure on your projects, you owe it to yourself and to your organization to think through why these failures happened. And again, when we think about the Burma Campaign, the three main reasons why there was failure was, number one, a lack of preparation. Number two, unclear overall objectives and strategies. And then thirdly, there was poor execution. So, you know what it's like to fail. It's something where many of us, I know for me, when I experience failure in my life, I get pretty bummed out. And it's easy for me to beat myself up and to really get depressed. And that can often lead to a passivity and a lack of action. And you don't want to go there as a leader. So I want to read from the book again as he reflects upon his failures as a leader. But the commander has failed in his duty if he has not won victory, for that is his duty. He has no other comparable to it. He will go over in his mind the events of the campaign. Here, he will think, I went wrong. Here I took counsel of my fears when I should have been bold. There I should have waited to gather strength, not struck piecemeal. At such a moment, I failed to grasp opportunity when it was presented to me. He will remember the soldiers whom he sent into the attack that failed and who did not come back. He will recall the look in the eyes of men who trusted him. I have failed them, he will say to himself, and failed my country. He will see himself for what he is, a defeated general. In a dark hour, he will turn in upon himself and question the very foundations of his leadership and his manhood. And then he must stop. For if he is ever to command in battle again, he must shake off these regrets and stamp on them as they claw at his will and his self-confidence. He must beat off these attacks he delivers against himself and cast out the doubts born of failure. Forget them and remember only the lessons to be learned from defeat. They are more than from victory. So let me give you some action items as you consider what we've talked about here today. Number one, take your last project that you experienced failure on, and then commit to doing a debrief. Invite representatives of every branch of the service, right? So get guys and gals from the field, from the office, evaluate each area of the project, the bid, the plan, the build, and even the billing aspect of it. Ask yourself and ask your team, what worked? What didn't work? Did we prepare sufficiently? Were we clear with our objectives and strategy? Was our execution up to par? After you've asked what worked and what didn't work, then ask, what will we do differently knowing what we now know? Those are three key questions. What worked? What didn't work? What will we do differently knowing what we now know? And then after that, you need to put together a system of actions. So for instance, you might do more work up front to find out who all the buyers are when you're looking to bid work to someone that you're not familiar with. You could commit to having a better handoff meeting from estimating to PMs. You might have a strong kickoff meeting using the executives of the company to set forth the strategy and the objectives of the project. You might make sure your guys are trained and that you consider the crew makeup so that you have a good combination of old heads and green peas. You might commit to ongoing training. Perhaps you'll insist on timely reporting, and you commit to meeting on a weekly basis to review the project and review your metrics. And then finally, you commit to dealing with issues quickly so you don't bleed money. My name is Eric Anderton. I really appreciate you listening to this show, and I hope you got some insights from this book, Defeat into Victory. One of the great things about Bill Slim is that he led his troops back into battle with the Japanese from 1943 through 44 and 45, and they eventually defeated the Japanese, learning many, many lessons from their initial defeat in Burma in 1942. So as you go about your day, and as you think about your failures, don't get bummed out. Take complete responsibility for your failures as a leader, and make sure you take active steps to learn from those failures and to remedy them on your next project. And never forget, the lessons to be learned from defeat they are more than from victory. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity, and to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.